It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when life showed its cruelest face. Jacob, a young man barely making ends meet, walked home with his head down, soaked to the bone. The city streets were slick with rain, and the sound of honking cars echoed through the empty alleys. He had just lost his job, his savings were gone, and everything he had worked for seemed to crumble in front of him. Feeling invisible and defeated, he didn't even notice the man approaching from the corner of the street. The stranger was older, with kind eyes that seemed to see right through Jacob's despair. He didn't ask questions, didn't judge. He simply handed Jacob a warm cup of coffee and a small, neatly wrapped sandwich. "Here, you'll need this more than I do," the man said, his voice gentle but certain. In that fleeting moment, Jacob felt a warmth he hadn't felt in months. It was more than just the food, it was the reminder that someone cared, that kindness still existed in a world that often seemed cold and indifferent. Before we dive deeper into this story, if you enjoy heartwarming tales that restore your faith in humanity, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, Kindness Story Hub, like this video, and leave a comment sharing your own experiences of kindness. Your support helps us share more stories that touch hearts and inspire change. Jacob didn't know it at the time, but that single act of kindness would stay with him for years. Life, as it often does, didn't pause to give him a break. He struggled through countless dead-end jobs, late-night shifts, and moments of hopelessness. Yet, every time he thought about giving up, he remembered the stranger's smile, the simple words, and the warm sandwich that had reminded him that even in the darkest days, there was light. He began to believe that kindness, no matter how small, could ripple through someone's life in ways they might never fully understand. So he tried, whenever he could, to pass it on. Sometimes it was just holding the door open for someone carrying heavy bags, offering a seat to a tired commuter, or leaving a generous tip for a young waitress who looked overworked. Jacob wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, but he discovered something more powerful than money. He had the ability to make someone's day a little brighter. Years passed. Jacob eventually found stability. He built a modest home, held a steady job, and began to slowly mend the scars of the past. Life was still far from perfect, but he had learned to appreciate the small joys, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the laughter of children playing in the park, and the quiet satisfaction of helping someone else. Yet, he never forgot the man who had once given him a sandwich on a rainy street corner. He often wondered what had become of him. Who was he? And why had a complete stranger been so selfless at that exact moment when Jacob needed it most? Then, one chilly autumn evening, everything changed. Jacob had just finished work and was walking home through the same streets that had once felt so lonely and unforgiving. The leaves crunched beneath his boots, and the wind carried the first hints of winter. A car pulled over beside him, and he noticed an older man leaning out of the passenger window. His heart skipped a beat. The man looked familiar, the same gentle eyes, the same kind smile. Jacob froze, unsure if this was a dream or reality. "Jacob," the man called. "It's been a long time." Jacob approached cautiously, his mind racing. "Yes. I remember you," he said, his voice trembling. You helped me years ago." The man nodded. "I never thought I'd see you again." "I'm glad I did." He handed Jacob a small envelope. "I wanted to make sure you received this." Jacob opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a note, written in careful, deliberate handwriting. It read, "Kindness is a seed. You never know how it will grow, but I trust it will flourish. I've been following your journey from afar. You've made the world brighter for so many, just as you deserved someone to do for you once. Use this gift to continue spreading kindness." Beneath the note was a check, not an extravagant sum, but more than enough to help Jacob fulfill a dream he had long postponed, opening a small community cafe where anyone in need could find a warm meal, a cup of coffee, and a friendly smile. Jacob's eyes filled with tears. He couldn't believe that the same stranger who had once helped him had returned, not for recognition, but to continue a chain of kindness that had started years ago. Over the next few weeks, Jacob poured his heart into the cafe. He decorated it with warmth and care, ensuring it was a safe space for anyone who needed it. Homeless people, overworked students, single parents, and elderly neighbors all found a place at his tables. Jacob treated each guest with the same gentle kindness he had once received, and soon, word spread. The cafe became a small sanctuary in the bustling city, a reminder that even a single act of compassion could ripple out to touch countless lives. Jacob never learned the stranger's full story. He never knew why the man had chosen to help him that day, or why he had returned years later. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the lesson he carried in his heart: kindness is never wasted. Every gesture, every smile, every small act of care has the power to change someone's life in ways that might only reveal themselves years later. One morning, a young man walked into Jacob's cafe, drenched from the rain and looking weary and defeated. He reminded Jacob of himself, of that rainy day so many years ago. Without a second thought, Jacob handed him a warm cup of coffee and a sandwich. "Here," he said softly, "you'll need this more than I do." And as he watched the young man take the first grateful sip, Jacob felt the familiar warmth he had once felt so long ago. It was the same warmth that had reminded him that he was not invisible, that kindness still existed, and that even in the darkest times, a simple act of generosity could spark hope. The young man smiled, and for a brief moment, the world outside seemed to pause. Jacob realized that this was the true magic of kindness: it never ends. One person's generosity can ignite another's compassion, creating a chain that continues far beyond anyone's imagination. Jacob's story reminds us that even when life feels unfair, even when the world seems harsh, every kind gesture matters. It doesn't take wealth or fame to make a difference. Sometimes, all it takes is a sandwich, a cup of coffee, a listening ear, or a simple smile. And if you're lucky, the kindness you show today may return in ways you could never expect, sometimes years later, sometimes in the form of a gift, a smile, or even a new purpose in life. So, as you go about your day, remember Jacob's story. Look around you for opportunities to help, to comfort, to uplift. You never know whose life you might touch, whose day you might brighten, or whose chain of kindness you might continue. And in a world that often seems full of struggle and uncertainty, these small acts become beacons of hope, reminding us all that humanity is at its best when we care for one another. Years later, Jacob would tell his story to anyone who would listen. He would explain how a single act of kindness from a stranger had not only changed his life but had inspired him to touch countless others. And he would always end with the same heartfelt advice: never underestimate the power of kindness, because it has a way of finding its way back to you, often when you least expect it. As the sun set behind the city skyline, casting golden light through the cafe windows, Jacob looked around at the bustling room filled with laughter, conversation, and warmth. He thought of the stranger who had believed in him when no one else did. He thought of the countless people he had helped since. And he smiled, knowing that the chain of kindness would continue long after he was gone. In the end, the world isn't measured by wealth, power, or fame. It's measured by how we treat one another, by the small acts of love and compassion we extend without expecting anything in return. Jacob's life and the lives he touched proved that kindness is never wasted. It grows, it spreads, and it can transform the world, one simple act at a time. So the next time you have a chance to help someone, don't hesitate. Give that sandwich, offer that smile, share that moment of care. You never know how far your kindness will travel, or how deeply it might touch a life even years later, just like it did for Jacob. And perhaps one day, someone you've helped will return the favor, not for recognition, but to keep the cycle of kindness alive.